37 letters, all returned.
I am 82 years old. I have outlived my husband. I have outlived my sister. I have watched this city change around me like a river changing its banks. And I have never, not once in my life, begged anyone for anything. But that morning, that freezing Tuesday morning in January, I came closer to begging than I ever thought I would. Because the man standing in my hallway was not just trying to take my apartment, he was about to destroy the only proof that his own father had ever been a decent human being. What happened next? I still can hardly believe it myself. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I have lived in apartment 3B of this building at 114 Decker Street in South Boston for going on 39 years. 39 years. I moved in the spring after my husband Robert passed. Our kids were grown. The house in Dorchester felt too big, too quiet, too full of the echo of someone who wasn't there anymore. So I packed what I could carry and I moved here. Back in those days, the building belonged to a man named Gerald Caldwell. Gentleman, always wore a flat cap, even in summer. Spoke with a slight accent he never quite lost. Something faintly Eastern European in the way he said certain words. Gerald and I, we had an understanding. I paid my rent on the first of every month without fail, and he made sure the radiators worked and the hallway lights stayed on. Gerald passed about 4 years ago, and when he did, everything about this building changed. His son Mark took over, and Mark was a different kind of man entirely. I heard the boots on the stairs first, heavy, fast, like someone who didn't care what sound they made. Then the knock, 3 hard bangs that rattled my door in the frame. I already had a feeling in my gut. You get to my age, you develop a certain radar for trouble. And every nerve in my body told me that what was on the other side of that door was going to be the worst kind. I opened it. Mark Caldwell stood there in his fancy coat, and behind him were 2 workers I'd never seen before. Big men. One of them was already holding a box. And Mark, he didn't even say good morning. He just held up that manila envelope and said, "Mrs. Hayes, as of today, you are being removed from the premises for non-payment of rent. We have a court order." I looked at him. I said, "Mark, I have paid my rent every single month for 39 years. He said, "The records say otherwise." Folks, in 39 years, through blizzards, through illness, through the months after Robert died when I barely left that apartment, I never once missed a payment. Not one. My neighbour across the hall, Patricia, she'd just gotten home from a 12-hour night shift at Mass General. She opened her door and stood there watching, and I could see her face change the moment she understood what was happening. Patricia had only lived on this floor for 2 years, but in those 2 years, she'd become the kind of person I never expected to find again at my age. She checked on me, brought me soup when the weather was bad, called me Miss Eleanor, like I was somebody worth respecting. She looked at Mark and she said very quietly, "Sir, do you know who this woman is?" Mark didn't even turn around. He just said, "It doesn't matter." Patricia looked at me, and I gave her a small nod, as if to say, "Don't fight this, not yet," because I knew something that none of them knew, and I was waiting for the right moment. They started with the easy things, the chair, my old suitcase, a box of winter clothes. They weren't rough about it, I'll give them that. But they weren't careful either. My photograph of Robert and me at Revere Beach, that one went face down in the slush, and I had to press my lips together hard to keep from saying a word. Down the street, old Walt Henderson lived in this neighborhood since the 70s. He came out of his house and just stood there watching. Walt doesn't say much anymore since his stroke, but he was watching. And across the way, Maria Delgado from the corner bodega stepped outside with her arms crossed and her jaw set. She and I have shared coffee on Sunday mornings for 15 years. I could feel the whole street watching, and I just sat at my kitchen table, still, because inside that table, inside that little drawer that had been in this apartment longer than I had, was the thing that would change everything. I just had to wait for the right moment to say it. When I saw them take hold of my kitchen table, I put my hand on it, just my hand. No shouting, no tears. I looked at Mark and I said the 8 words that I'd been saving all morning. I said, "You should open the drawer before you destroy everything." Mark looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. He almost laughed. He said, "Mrs. Hayes, there is nothing in that drawer that changes what the court document says." I said, "Then it won't hurt you to look." There was a long pause. The workers looked at Mark. Mark looked at me. And something, I don't know what, made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way I said it. Calm, certain, like a woman who knows exactly where she's standing. He nodded at the worker. The worker pulled the table away from the wall, and the drawer slid open. They fell out like snow. 47 envelopes. I know exactly how many because I counted them myself every time I added a new one. Each one addressed to Mark Caldwell, care of Caldwell Property Management on Commonwealth Avenue. Each one sealed, each one stamped, each one with a date written in my handwriting in the upper left corner. Every single month for the past 4 years, every month since Gerald passed and Mark took over, I had written out my rent check, sealed it in an envelope, addressed it, stamped it, and put it in the mail slot at the post office on West Broadway. And every single month that envelope had come back to me, returned to sender, undeliverable, address unknown, or sometimes just no explanation at all. I kept every single one because I had a feeling. You don't get to 82 years old without learning how to protect yourself. Mark crouched down and picked one up. He looked at the address. He looked at the date. He turned it over, and then, slowly, he tore it open. I watched his face, the way you watch a storm come in over the harbor. First the confusion, then the calculations starting behind his eyes, trying to figure out how this happened, whose fault it was, whether he could blame someone else. He said, "These were returned?" I said every one of them, for 4 years. He said, "That's... Our address changed after the estate went into probate. We sent notices." I said, "Mark, I never received a single notice, not one. I paid what I owed every month for 39 years. And you stood in my hallway this morning and called me a delinquent tenant." He was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when a man realizes he has made a very serious mistake, but doesn't yet know how serious. But then Patricia said softly, "There's something else in the drawer." I looked. She was right. I hadn't seen that photograph in years. I thought I knew where it was, in a box somewhere in the closet. But there it was, tucked under all those envelopes, as if Gerald had put it there himself. Mark took it from Patricia. He stared at it for a long time. I could see him doing the math. His father, young and thin in a winter coat that wasn't warm enough for Boston in January, and me, 25 years old in my nurse's uniform, standing on those same front steps. He said, Is that my father?" I said, "It is." He said, "Where was this taken?" I said, "Right here, in front of this building, January of 1974. He looked up at me, and for the first time that morning, the hard edges of his face went soft. He said, "What happened in 1974? I said, "Read the letter underneath it." Gerald Caldwell wrote that letter the year before he died. I know because I watched him write part of it, right at that same kitchen table, on an afternoon in October when I brought him tea and he had that look on his face, the faraway look of a man who is trying to get something down on paper before it's too late. He sealed it and put it in the drawer himself. He said, "Eleanor, I want you to leave this here. Someday, someone may need to read it." He didn't say who. He didn't say when. I think he knew. The letter said this, and I have it memorized because I have read it so many times over the years. It said, "If my son ever stands in this room and tries to remove this woman, he deserves to know what she did for me." In January of 1974, I was 26 years old and had been in this country for 8 months. I had a room in a boarding house in Charlestown. I had a job washing dishes at a restaurant near Faneuil Hall. I had very little English and even less money. And one night during the worst snowstorm Boston had seen in a decade, my car, a 1969 Buick I had paid $300 for, broke down on a road I did not know, in a neighborhood I had never been to, in a cold so bad my hands stopped working. I sat in that car for 2 hours. I could feel myself getting sleeper. I did not know that was how freezing to death begins. A young woman knocked on my car window. She was in her nurse's uniform, walking home from a night shift at the hospital. She had no reason to stop. She could have called someone. She could have kept walking. Instead, she pulled open my door, put her arm under mine, and walked me 3 blocks to her apartment building. She made me soup. She called a mechanic. She sat with me until the color came back to my face. That woman was Eleanor Hayes, and I was so grateful that when the apartment above her opened up, I gave it to her at a price no landlord with any sense would agree to. And I made her a promise. I told her, "As long as I own this building, you will never lose your home." And that promise, Marcus, belongs to you now." Mark Caldwell stood in my kitchen for a very long time after he finished reading. Nobody said anything. Outside I could hear the street, cars passing, a pigeon on the window ledge, the distant wail of a tea train somewhere down Commonwealth. And then Patricia said, almost in a whisper, "There's one more thing in the drawer. I want to be honest with you." I had forgotten about that document. Gerald had prepared it years before he died, told me about it quietly one evening, pressed it into my hands, and said he'd made it right with a notary and it just needed to be filed at the county office. I told him it was too much. I told him to tear it up. He said he wouldn't. He said a promise was a promise, and he was putting it somewhere safe. He put it in the drawer. And I, foolish woman that I am, I set it aside and never filed it. Part of me didn't want to believe I needed it. Part of me thought we'd have more time. But there it was, notarized, witnessed, dated, legally binding in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Apartment 3B had been transferred to me 11 years ago, while Mark Caldwell was throwing my belongings onto the sidewalk on a Tuesday morning in January. He was evicting the legal owner of the apartment. You know, there are moments in your life when the whole world seems to go quiet at once, like even the city is holding its breath. That was one of those moments. Mark looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at the workers. He looked at the envelopes spread across my kitchen floor. And I watched something happen on his face that I have only ever seen in one other person. And that was his father, the morning I brought Gerald his coat after he'd walked 3 blocks in the cold without one. It was the look of a man realizing, all at once, that he has made a terrible mistake. And not just a practical mistake, a moral one. One of the workers, the younger one, couldn't have been more than 25. He quietly began picking up the envelopes, one by one, stacking them carefully on the table that they'd tried to carry out 30 minutes earlier. The other worker went downstairs without being asked and started bringing my things back in from the sidewalk. My chair, my suitcase, my photograph of Robert and me at Revere Beach. Nobody told them to do this. They just did it. Mark still hadn't spoken. He was reading the document again. Then he looked up and said the only thing he could think of to say, which was, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't. Your father was hoping you would become a different kind of man before you had to find out. I didn't ask Patricia to do what she did. But that woman, still in her scrubs, after a 12-hour night shift, when she should have been fast asleep, she called a property attorney she knew from a case she'd helped a patient with the year before. She explained the situation. She got the name of a title company that handled deed filings. She made 3 phone calls in 20 minutes. By noon that same day, the deed had been formally submitted for recording at the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds. By the following Tuesday, Apartment 3B at 114 Decker Street was officially, legally, on the public record as belonging to Eleanor Ruth Hayes. Patricia brought me the confirmation printout in a plastic sleeve. She stood at my door and held it out to me and said, "Miss Eleanor, you're a homeowner." I looked at that paper for a long time, and then I looked at her, this young woman who had come home exhausted from saving other people's lives and had spent her one free morning saving mine. And I didn't have a single word good enough. So I just took her hand and held it. 2 days later, Walt Henderson came and sat on the front stoop with me. Walt doesn't talk much since his stroke. He has to work hard for the words. But that morning he had something he needed to say. He said, "Eleanor, I saw Gerald put that document in there years ago. I was helping him move that table from the second floor to your apartment. He put it in the drawer himself, and he said, 'She'll know what to do with it when the time comes.'" I stared at him. I said, "Walt, you knew all this time?" He said, "I knew Gerald meant for you to have this apartment. I didn't know about the legal paper, but I knew." Folks, I sat on that cold stoop with Walt Henderson, and I thought about what it means to know someone for nearly 40 years, to be known by them, to have someone who saw your whole life from across a hallway and never needed to tell you what they knew. They just kept showing up. That's a rare thing. I don't care how old you are. That is a rare and sacred thing. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous when I heard the knock. My hands remembered that morning, even if my mind tried to let it go. I opened the door. Mark stood there, and he looked, I don't know the right word for it, smaller. Not in a bad way, in the way a person looks when they've put something heavy down. He said, "Mrs. Hayes, I owe you an apology. Not just for Tuesday, for all 4 years of returned mail that I never investigated, for not knowing this building's history, for not knowing what my father believed about the way to treat people." He stopped. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at this man who was somebody's son, who had a father who was more than he knew, and I thought about Gerald, gentle Gerald in his flat cap, and what he would have wanted from this moment. I said, "Mark, your father loved you. He just hoped you'd find your way to being the man he saw in you. It's not too late for that." He stood there for a moment, then he nodded once and walked back down the stairs. I don't know what happened inside him that day, but I know he looked different when he left. I did not organize that dinner. I want to be clear about that. Patricia organized it. Walt spread the word. Maria provided half the food and wouldn't take $1 for it. But they sat me at the head of that table on a cold Sunday in South Boston, on a sidewalk where my belongings had been scattered in the slush 2 weeks before. They set a chair for me, and they put flowers on it, grocery store carnations, pink and white, and they called it mine. And I sat there at the head of that table, looking up and down at all of these faces, people from this building, people from this street, people who had watched and people who had helped. And I thought about every Sunday dinner I had ever cooked in my life, for Robert, for the kids when they were small, for neighbors over the decades who came and went. And I thought, Gerald Caldwell saved my home. But these people, Patricia, Walt, Maria, the families from upstairs, they reminded me why a home is worth saving. It is not the walls, it is not the drawer or the deed or the legal document at the registry of deeds. It is the people who show up. It is always, always the people who show up. I still live in apartment 3B at 114 Decker Street. I made my tea this morning at my kitchen table, the same table that two men tried to carry out into the January cold. The drawer slides open just as it always has, a little stiff in winter, loose in summer. But there's nothing in it now except a spare key, a rubber band, and a photograph. The photograph of Gerald and me, out front, January 1974. His arm around my shoulder, and both of us grinning at whoever was holding the camera. On the back, in his handwriting, Eleanor and Gerald, she gave me my life back. At my age, you stop counting what you've lost, the years, the people, the chances you didn't take or took too late. You start counting the other thing instead, the mornings you woke up and the light came through your window, and the tea was warm, and the city outside was going about its business. The neighbours who knocked on your door just to check, the strangers who become family, the sons who find their fathers, sometimes too late, and sometimes just in time. Gerald Caldwell saved my home twice, once in his life and once after it, and I will live in it gratefully and not alone for every morning I have left. If my story touched your heart today, if it reminded you of someone you love, or of a kindness someone once showed you that you've never forgotten, please like this video and share it with someone who still believes that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who pulls open the car door in the cold and says, "Come on inside." And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There are more stories to tell. Stories of ordinary people living extraordinary lives right here in the towns and neighborhoods and apartment buildings of this country. People just like you. People just like me. And if you'd like to hear another story about family, regret, and second chances, about the things we bury in drawers, and the truths that find their way out no matter how long we wait, click the video on your screen right now. I'll be right there waiting to tell it.